what ought to be on the Democratic senator's website who wants to lead us into change ought to be a serious accounting of this responsibility and complicity. Now, John Nichols from The Nation says, the increasingly lamentable Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid chirped that, quote, our support for the Patriot Act does not mean a blank check for the president, quote. Okay, if it's not a blank check, what is it? What is it? It's not a blank check when you approve appropriations. It's not a blank check when you support these, invasions on our civil liberties. And Senator Byrd, West Virginia senator, who voted wrong the first time but came around the second time, he said, quote, there is no doubt that constitutional freedoms will never be abolished in one fell swoop. For the American people cherish their freedoms and would not tolerate such a loss if they could perceive it. But the erosion of freedom rarely comes as an all-out frontal assault, but rather as a gradual, noxious creeping, cloaked in secrecy and glossed over by reassurances of greater safety. There are so many things we could talk about on this subject. Do you remember the waterboarding discussion? Do you remember the story that broke in December 2007? I'll read you from one of the stories. Quote, two senior Republicans and Democrats in Congress, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, were briefing on the CIA's program to use waterboarding on terror suspects in September 2002 and did not object, according to Sunday's Washington Post. A Pelosi aide said the speaker remembered discussions of enhanced interrogation techniques and acknowledged that Pelosi did not raise objections at the time. When we look at the tremendous harm that's being caused by this war, we have to remember where we were at the outset. Do you remember the United Nations appearance by Colin Powell? Do you remember the claim of weapons of mass destruction? Well, before Colin Powell spoke at the United Nations March 7th, 2003, he was preceded by Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix and Mohammed El Baradei of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Blix spoke first. He said, based on thorough analysis, the IAEA has concluded with the concurrence of outside experts that these documents, which form the basis for the report of recent uranium transaction between Iraq and Niger, are in fact not authentic. We have therefore concluded that these specific allegations are unfounded. Additionally, there is no indication that Iraq has attempted to import aluminum tubes for use in centrifuge enrichment. Moreover, even had Iraq pursued such a plan, it would have encountered practical difficulties in manufacturing centrifuge out of the aluminum tubes in question. And also, Iraq's use of 81mm aluminum tubes was for reverse engineering of imported rockets, not for use to enrich uranium. Colin Powell had to sit through another presentation. Baradei said, after 3 months of intrusive inspections, we have to date found no evidence or plausible indication of the revival of a nuclear weapon program in Iraq. Norman Solomon wrote a book that was made into a film recently called War Made Easy. It's a film directed by Loretta Alper. In it, he recounts how casualties in war engagements that the United States has been involved in, how civilian casualties have increased in each of these wars. So in World War I, the total number of casualties, the civilian deaths for the total casualties, 10% civilian deaths. World War II, 30% civilian dead in that war. Vietnam, 70% civilian dead. The war in Iraq, 90%. Do you understand what this figure constitutes? I think it's a war crime to engage in war where 90% of the casualties are civilians. That means for every soldier that you've got to kill 9 civilians to get to that person. This is amazingly troubling.